This is 15 minutes of impact from the United States Energy Association Power Sector Podcast, sponsored by the Natural Gas Supply Association. I'm Herman K. Trabish. I've covered the power sector since 2006, and I currently report for Utility Dive. In this episode of the podcast series on natural gas issues, we're going to talk with Tim Spear, a partner specializing in energy issues with powerhouse law firm Foley and Lardner. Tim's going to describe his perspective on current U.S. and global natural gas and other energy market factors and dynamics and emerging trends. Tim's almost three-decade legal career has included acquisitions, divestitures, and financing of energy and infrastructure projects, including natural gas projects, around the world. He heads Foley's Carbon Capture and Storage Group, and he has been lead external counsel on energy industry transactions priced at over $1 billion. And that's saying something. Tim, how would you describe today's natural gas market supply demand dynamics? How do you think new data center loads will affect the demand for natural gas generation? What about the recent budget bill?
Thank you, Herman. I really appreciate the kind introduction and look forward to our conversation today. In terms of supply demand dynamics in natural gas, I think we're seeing a balanced market with, the last several months, natural gas prices have been going down relatively steadily. I think if you go back over a year, last summer they were lower, I think, generally than now. They tended to spike up over the winter, maybe early part of this year. And where they go from here, it's hard to say. Right? It's forecasting, but I think there is, at least right now, it looks like there's more downward pressure than upward pressure pending exogenous events. Obviously a hurricane, right? Anything like that, who knows? A global conflict that could affect it. In terms of
We
data
seem,
centers, go ahead.
I'm sorry to interrupt. I was just going to say we seem to live in a time when there's lots of exogenous effects. Go ahead.
Yeah, no,
So
we do, right? And that's where, the traders, I guess that's how they make their living. They have to adjust on the fly to that stuff. In terms of data center impact, I think it's
yeah,
everyone I think everyone anticipates that will drive a lot of demand for gas, but power generally, not just gas generation. I think even, and I know you've had other experts on talking about this data center bill. Even if you look at low end projections on data centers, it's going to have a tremendous impact on basically the power sector. It just those data centers are so energy intensive that it's going to have to, even a few data centers are going to have an impact, right? An outsized impact, because
yeah.
like yeah, I know you're well aware of which the five nines concept of basically redundancy, and so that I think is going to mean we're going to see a lot of gas, but I think we'll probably also see a continued build out of other generation assets as well.
Yeah, let's break that down real quick, Tim, for our listeners. Five nines and redundancy. Um, uh, Five nines means that data centers operate 24/7. They have a high demand, so they want 99.999% reliability that they will have energy to keep running. Is that that's what you mean, isn't it?
Yeah, that's what I mean, and I think that's commonly understood in the industry. And I think the other thing, in our, my experience, data center developers are also sensitive to environmental concerns, and so I think many of them are, tend to be the tech industry, which I think the tech industry is sensitive to its demands on the power systems, and so I think you'll still see redundancies based on the gas side, but also you'll also see a renewable focus where those companies, those basically off takers are going to want to have projects that do have a significant component of renewable energy sources as well.
Yeah, we
So
just saw that big deal with Google. They bought that was I think it was 3 gigawatts of
huge.
hydro. Yeah,
Yeah.
and
I think it's going to be I mean, my sense, I do think this is shared by colleagues, is that we do see that as the way those things will be built is they'll have the multiple redundancies, including likely in several cases anyway, different sources of generation. Just because to achieve that 5.9 standard, that's an extremely high standard. So you're going to need lots of redundancies, I think, for sure. And all of that
Yeah,
is going to impact, I think, gas prices and demand for generation assets and equipment.
yeah, that's what I wanted to tie that to the subject of this podcast, which is the natural gas market supply demand dynamics. So what's going to happen is that wherever these data centers hook up, the systems, the utility or the system operator is going to want a lot more generation, which will both spur the growth of renewables and natural gas plants. Is that
Definitely.
what you're saying?
I think absolutely. Yeah. I think it's there, I think nuclear as well, not really, I think our topic for today, but I think the new developments in nuclear will likely come into play as well. Um,
Right.
yeah, so I think, there's always optimism. I'm a player in the energy sector, so you're always hopeful that to see projects go forward. But I think that, like I said, even if there are fewer data center projects than expected, it's still going to have a big impact on the power sector generally and natural gas in particular.
Most people I hear from these days say, yeah, it's probably not quite as going to be as big as everybody's saying, the growth of data centers. Let's move on. First of all, briefly, I don't want to talk politics, Tim. That's not on the agenda today, but the recent budget bill, it seems like it will make it more difficult for renewables to build, and easier for natural gas to build. Do you think that impact is going to be felt as we go forward?
Yes, and I also think there's a yes and no element to that. I think initially, because of the timing, there's actually going to be a rush to get renewable projects started. So I think this year, 2025 in
Uh,
particular, by the end of the year, there'll be a lot of construction. I think there's some debate about how you define construction, but anyway, there'll be a lot of work done on renewables projects by the end of this year. And then I think you'll also see a lot of development and basically finalization, hopefully uh, within the next couple of years, right? So before, I guess, 2028. Um, so yeah, I think the short term actually is it might actually accelerate some renewable projects just to make sure that projects meet the deadlines, the new deadlines. But longer term, I think it does create instability in that sector. But I think that the renewable sector is used to that from prior to the IRA. They always had to deal with those issues. So I think that market will adjust, and in some ways it's kind of return to normalcy for that market where you don't know if the law is going to change. So a lot of year-end deadlines, that's pretty typical. And I think that's what they'll see a return to.
Okay, and I want to remind our listeners that you're hearing that from a guy who knows these people in the renewable sector who do the building and who do the spending. But let me just ask you one more thing, Tim. I don't know if you want to comment on this, but we just within a few days ago we heard about this big deal that is going to invest, I think, $750 billion over 3 years for the U.S. to supply the EU with LNG and fuel oils. And there's a lot of controversy about that. Do you want to weigh in? Do you think that's going to affect the market, and how?
I guess I won't. Yeah, there's kind of a political element there. I'll probably
Yeah.
not get into too much. But in terms of LNG export growth, I think that's the delays in LNG projects, which we've seen the last year or two or three. I think that has probably dampened get natural gas prices here a little bit.
Mm.
But I think there are several projects that are going to come online relatively soon. And when they do, I think that gas, a lot of it will go to Europe. At a high level, my understanding is it's about these are projections. These are numbers I'm relying on other sources, not kind of from my own head, but $5 to $6 to get gas to Europe. So if you've got a $3 price, add six to it, that's about $9 per MMBTU. My understanding as of this last week was a gas price, assuming LNG liquefied in Europe is about $14. So there's a pretty big spread. So yeah, I think there is a demand in Europe for gas coming from the LNG coming from the US. And I think the supply is here. I think there is gas available to go there. It's really, I think the constraint is the LNG export facilities. Um, so I think that is likely, and I think that will have an effect. Just depends on when those projects go, but I think that will have an effect on U.S. natural gas prices eventually.
Well, you brought us to the next subject for this conversation, Tim. when those projects go. There's a lot of interest in reforms for permitting of natural gas plants, natural gas export plants, and pipelines. Do you see reforms coming? And if you do, what kind of reforms? And will will the failure to pass reforms, like what happened with the Manchin Barrasso bill last year, will that impact energy markets?
Yeah, I'll start on the last part of that. If we don't have energy reforms, I think that will impact markets, because I do think there's again, personal opinion, there is, I think, an expectation that some reforms will happen, um, particularly in areas I focus on pipelines and basically getting pipelines built. The last well, it came online this year. There was a very large pipeline project in the Appalachian Basin
Mm,
that was essentially completely built several years before it came online. There were just very small segments that were held up for years in litigation. And I think that was a driver for that bill because, then Senator Manchin, it was in his home state that was feeling those effects. So, and I think my understanding, there was bipartisan support for something like that bill, because it wasn't, as I understand it, not particularly just focused on fossil fuels. My understanding is it was focused on just project development, infrastructure development generally, which wasn't particularly designed to just benefit natural gas pipelines. It was to all basically speed up all development of infrastructure, LNG, natural gas, but also, there's been impediments around the country to, carbon dioxide pipelines, right? That are necessary for, some carbon capture projects, things like that. Um, so I understand that was the intent of the bill, and I think there was bipartisan support. Not a bill expert at all, but my understanding was just the timing of that probably wasn't right. I I do think there's an expectation something along those lines will happen. And if there isn't something like that reforming the process, I do think that could have a negative impact on the natural gas sector.
This episode is brought to you by the Natural Gas Supply Association, a DC-based trade association that represents domestic producers and marketers of natural gas. Natural gas stands out as a fuel of choice for America's energy future. It is affordable, reliable, and sustainable. Today, natural gas powers a growing share of industrial facilities, data centers, homes, and also supports the expansion of renewable energy. The benefits of natural gas rely not only on expanding our nation's energy infrastructure, like pipelines and storage facilities, but also ensuring regulatory certainty so businesses can construct and maintain this infrastructure. The Natural Gas Supply Association advocates for permitting reform to streamline the process for approving necessary infrastructure projects without compromising environmental protections. The natural gas sector has proven itself adaptable and resilient, meeting rising demand while maintaining affordability. By investing in infrastructure, embracing permitting reform, and fostering a fact-based regulatory environment, we can ensure that natural gas continues to be a reliable foundation for America's energy future. It is our responsibility to strengthen this foundation today so that we can meet the energy demands of tomorrow. Learn more by visiting www.ngsa.org.
Really on the production side, and it'll delay projects that I think people aren't expecting those delays.
Okay, will that get natural gas flowing in a way that'll impact prices, supply demand balances?
Potentially you could see some uptick. I mean, I think that once that happens, though, I think there is gas available. I think the there is a dynamic there. So price goes up a little bit, then I think you see more wells drilled and completed.
Right.
There could be an increase, but then that would drive more production, which would probably put a damper on the increase in prices.
Yeah, well,
That's how cyclical goes. I think historically that's how it's gone. You're right.
yeah, and there's a long track record if that's how it's gone too. For our listeners, we are going to be doing a long series of podcast on permitting reforms, so we'll get deeper into that. Maybe we'll have Tim back to talk more about it, or somebody else from Foley. Next question, Tim. The last administration led big efforts on wind solar batteries. It funded pilots and demonstrations for carbon capture and enhanced geothermal, advanced nuclear, hydrogen hubs. The current administration seems to be narrowing the focus. How has that impacted energy markets, and do you see further impacts from this narrowing?
Yeah, I think, as I said before, I think the short term is it actually may accelerate some of the energy transition projects, renewable projects, so they get the tax
Right.
credits. Longer term, I think there are some impediments there by that change in terms of the impact more on the fossil side and some of the other uh, types of fuel that are going to benefit from the One Big Beautiful bill. I do think initially I haven't seen a big uptick, but I do think that there will be a, with the depreciation rules change, expensing 100% in the first year. I think that will lead to more activity. And those,
Now, for instance, with natural gas, some there were some benefits available, I think, in the budget bill for carbon capture add-ons. Are you seeing more interest in that?
I think there's definitely interest in carbon capture, particularly by very large companies. They are concerned about emissions and climate change, and but my sense is that it is just an expensive technology. The market maybe hasn't developed yet. It still may. There's still definitely a lot of interest in it, and that's probably a wait to see. But definitely that's a possibility. It could happen in the near term because there's still lots of interest in it, I think.
Interesting. Okay, last question, Tim. We just have a few minutes left. Um, I want to ask you about trends. I'm not asking you to look in your crystal ball. I'm not asking you to predict the future. What I really want to know is, are there any trends happening right now in the natural gas sector or other energy markets around the world that we haven't talked about yet that might seem important, even though they seem to be left out of this conversation so far? And how are those trends going to impact the U.S.? Do you have anything on that?
Yeah, one thought I have on that, Herman, is, and this ties a little bit to your one of your prior podcasts. I think with the changes in the rules on renewables, you will see activity in this year and really over the next couple of years, but then you may have a slowdown on those build outs, renewable build out. And I think there's plenty of natural gas available for natural gas to kind of replace some of that generation. My concern is from the turbine supply point of view.
Ah,
And I think with the lead times and that, I think the timing, my concern is that you have a 2028 time frame where maybe renewables start to decline because of the changes in the implemented by the One Big Beautiful bill. But then you still have an increasing demand for power generation because of the data centers. Probably by then there'll be a lot more of them being built and having started. And so where's that power going to come from? I think you would initially think, oh, natural gas will supplant that. There's plenty of natural gas, which I think that's true. But the concern I have is the gas turbine market. Now
right.
they're the huge OEMs where I think everybody that follows the sector is aware of these backlogs, these delays in getting. There are smaller turbines, which I think they're those kind of 6-8 megawatts where you can kind of put them together and basically make one large power plant, but basically incrementally add units. I think that's a possible source of generation using natural gas, most likely that can kind of fill that blank, or fill that void. But I do think there's potentially an issue there where people haven't focused on that aspect of it enough.
That's really interesting because, yeah, this rush for renewables, because the tax credits expire sooner, has to come to an end, I think, in 28. And what we're hearing, what you referred to, is we've done podcasts with folks who are saying these delivery delays and order backlogs are, we've heard 5 years. Somebody from GE just the other day, I heard him say, well, it's only 4 years. But if it's only 4 years, that's 29. So
2029.
Yeah, that's a gap. That's a real serious gap. And it's a gap, as you pointed out, I hadn't really put it all together that way. It's really interesting. These data centers that we're talking about now, they're going to be coming online by then, right?
Right. And how do you achieve that 5.9 reliability standard they want when we're potentially going to be short on generation equipment,
Yeah,
really? Yeah.
absolutely. And a lot of the natural gas fleet is aging, and all this SMRs and nuclear plants being restarted, that's going to take a lot of time. Well, anyway, it's going to give us a lot to talk about, Tim, and we're going to be having you come on and tell us what's going on and for a while. I'm sorry, but you're going to be on the spot to tell us what's happening. I want to thank you. My guest has been Foley and Lardner partner Tim Spear. He's described his perspective on current market factors and dynamics and the newest trends in U.S. and global natural gas and other energy markets. I also want to thank our sponsor, the Natural Gas Supply Association. And as always, I want to thank our listeners for taking the time to check out the USEA Power Sector Podcast, now on most of your favorite podcast resources, including Pandora, Apple Podcast, and even Deezer. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and share with everybody you know our quest for energy transition solutions.